VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. I'm here with Josh Fry, who is a mainstay guest, but we have a special guest. He was on a couple years ago on this program. He's back right before this really pivotal draft. It's Nick Olson. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, Dustin. How are you doing? Good to be back.
Not bad. And how have you been? We haven't talked for 2 years. We're about to flip over a new era of Vikings football. Are you excited for that in general?
I'm super excited. We were just chatting before the show started. I feel like this is the most interesting draft the Vikings have had in at least a decade because of the quarterback conundrum and the intrigue there. And are they going to? They seem after the Texans trade poised to trade up if they want to. Not that they necessarily will. There's a lot of really exciting, really different quarterback prospects in this draft, and they've got a lot of other needs too. But injecting a rookie quarterback into an offense with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson, and then your bookend tackles and Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill is really exciting. So that's kind of an ideal setup. So it's easy to get excited. And Kwesi and the team have done a really good job making this offseason really interesting and really fun. It feels like the Vikings have been in the news almost every single day. So many free agent signings and then trades and then everything. So yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, it's really been quarterback mania for the last 2 weeks. Anytime you see something new, it's like, oh, it's McCarthy, huh? Oh, it's Drake May, huh? And we're gonna get into that tonight too. In case I forget, it's Nick Olson NFL. Is that still the Twitter or the X handle?
Yes, that's my X handle.
Yeah. And then do you
gotta call it that now?
do you still write here and there?
I do when the inspiration strikes, but talk about the last couple of years. I'm like a full-time lawyer in my real world job. So yeah. Which is not a job that's known for affording
Downtime.
Great work-life balance. So
yeah.
I haven't in a while, but I mean if you're interested in my work product, most of it's on X, formerly known as Twitter. So.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Josh. We're going to talk to Nick tonight for about 20 minutes. Why don't you launch into it with your first question for Nick Olson?
Yeah, so obviously been a very busy offseason for the Vikings. Lots of free agents, all sorts of QB rumors, news, stuff like that. But one thing that's been pretty quiet, especially over the past few weeks, has been a Justin Jefferson contract extension. And I know a lot of people have pretty much just assumed that it's going to happen at some point, probably after the draft when they inevitably select that quarterback or whatever they do come April 25th. But is there any sort of fear in your mind that this deal just doesn't get done and we kind of get to July and we're still just sitting on our hands waiting for something to happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. Fear isn't the right word for it. I think it's realistic that it doesn't get done immediately anytime soon. But I'm not concerned about the contract situation, regardless, because the Vikings essentially have 2 years of team control under Jefferson's rookie contract. This last year of his very cheap, his cap is $3 million a year this year. Next year, his 5th year option kicks in and he's at 19 million, I think 19.1 million, for the 2024 season. But after that, even on top of those 2 years of team control, they can franchise tag him after that. And the franchise tag for a player of Justin Jefferson's caliber is going to be cheap. The first year is going to be 23 million, the wide receiver salaries are going up a little bit. So there's some projection involved. But last year, the wide receiver franchise tag was 22 million. So 23 million, that's a lot cheaper than, the 30, 35 million Jefferson's going to get on a new deal. And then they can tag him again. The price goes up a little bit. It would be 26 million or whatever in 2026, whatever. But at that point, you're talking about 4 years team control. So it's only in the 5th year that the franchise tag gets really untenable. All that's to say, I think it'll happen. This is a break in case of emergency glass situation, but it also helps frame why Kwesi doesn't need to be in a rush to do this. And, Jefferson's agent, this is going to be his biggest payday of his life. So he's not in a rush to screw this up either. At the end of the day, it's going to come in and he's probably going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, which right now I think is Nick Bosa at $34 million a year. Right now, the highest paid wide receiver is Tyreek Hill at $30 million. Even that is some funny money in it. So Jefferson's going to break the wide receiver market when it eventually happens. But I do think it will happen. At the same time, a lot of times these negotiations, you need some sort of 11th hour come to Jesus moment where there's this pressure that we have to do this done before the deadline or else it's just not going to happen. But Jefferson, there isn't that pressure necessarily for a lot of reasons. So It would not surprise. I feel like Kwesi wants to get this done because it's a priority and it's a huge thing on his to-do list, his checklist for the offseason. We are at the point where 2 years out, this is a good time to do the extension. They thought about it last year, but that would have been 3 years out. So not totally surprising it didn't happen last offseason. You don't want to, have him start going into contract, even with the franchise tag. It's just kind of like, especially when he's like the face of your franchise and, the number one jersey seller and all the things that from the business perspective too, he's a very valuable asset just in terms of, getting butts and seats and selling jersey sales. So like they're going to get it done, but I don't necessarily know that it's going to be immediately after the draft or whatever it's going to happen. So long-winded way of saying like it could take some time, but I'm not super worried about it for a lot of different reasons. It'll happen, I think, eventually.
I think another sort of added security, at least from my point of view, is that when it didn't happen last offseason, it really didn't change anything for him in terms of his offseason process. He was still like, obviously he missed some practice time because of that advertisement deal that he had to do, but he was there at training camp. He was basically just, I want to suit up and be there for my guys. So that's kind of where I'm at too. I'm not necessarily concerned about it. It's just, once we get to July, we'll probably be a little bit more concerned about it. That's just me as a person being a little bit too paranoid about it. But yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. It'll happen. And like it's a good point. Like last year it was a big offseason talker, but then the season happened and Jefferson is pure football. So agent, team, money stuff, that'll all work itself out, I think.
I think the reason that not me or anybody on this show, but the masses will be paranoid about it is because in our adult lives, all the good wide receivers get traded. It's like, what are we doing between Moss, or maybe my adult life? I don't know how young you guys are, but with Moss, Harvin, Diggs, it's like we were told one thing and then another thing happened. I've tried to understand why this is such a hot talker. And I think it's because, when the deal hasn't been done, then NFL media proliferates that into the, oh, hey, where could he land up if he's traded somewhere? And so that just fills the dead zone. And then I think, Nick, you mentioned this right before the regular season started last year. I think it was like that Saturday. Was it O'Neill's contract was restructured or somebody's contract was restructured? And we learned at a press conference, I think it was in January, that's how close they were. That was the springboard because they thought they had the deal done, and then whatever snagged it. Here we are now. But yeah, I'm right there with you with a lack of anxiety about Jefferson on the whole. I know that they probably won't even get to that franchise tag point because that usually causes disharmony. So I think to Josh's question, it'll get done here relatively soon, especially after we have this quarterback verdict and climax. I'm going to ask you about that in about 10 minutes. But first, we spend so much time, if you pull up any page of the internet pertaining to the Vikings, it's like, hey, which quarterback are you going to take? Which is totally founded, and I know why people want to talk about that. But what about the second guy in the draft? And it's up to you, Nick, to tell me if that's at number 23, if that is in round 4. If assuming that your prediction ends up being a quarterback, who do you think, maybe a player or a position, they target after they make their first round pick?
Yeah, it's tough to get into names because I do think that, that number 23 pick, I don't think they're going to stay put at 23. I mean, we've already seen in the last couple drafts how trade addicted Kwesi is. He even gives Rick Spielman a good run for his money. So it's probably not going to be until day 3 that the Vikings are picking again, assuming their first pick is a quarterback, which if you look at how the roster is constructed, they did not give Sam Darnold starting quarterback money as the face of the franchise. So they've set themselves up with 2 first-round picks. It looks very much like they are setting the table for a trade up for a quarterback. We don't really know who it'll be, but like what that means is that we're going to have a very exciting, probably day 1, and a very boring day 2, as we continue to just watch more Drake May highlights or whatever it is that we're doing that day. But so it's probably sometime early-ish on day 3 when the Vikings are picking. And you can kind of only speculate who's going to be there. Like even right now, it's hard to say. Like they're a defensive lineman named like Ruka Rororo is a slightly undersized, really athletic defensive tackle who I think has the potential to develop into a good pass rusher. A similar undersized, athletic pass rushing defensive tackle, Mekhi Wingo. These are names that are kind of interesting to me. So I would say the interior defensive line definitely jumps out because right now They've got Harrison Phillips, who I think is a stout run plugger. He's not like, prime Linval Joseph, but he's a really solid, technique sound, capable of, playing across, multiple gaps. Really good sound run blocker. Doesn't offer you much as a pass rush, but as a nose guard with some versatility, he's a really solid, like not blue chip player, but red player for the Vikings. And they brought back a few other guys. They signed a couple intriguing project guys. But they just still need some more pass rush juice. Losing Daniil Hunter, losing DJ Wanham, even after they signed Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, they're still going to need a little bit more pass rush juice, especially along the interior defensive line, because right now there isn't really anybody. So that's why I kind of highlight the interior defensive line position. They could also go with more edge defenders. They're going to need some. I just think you're more likely to find, I think, contributors in the interior defensive line in later rounds than you are with edge rushers. I feel like the well is pretty dry by day 3. There's also some cornerback prospects. I did think it was interesting that they went out and signed Shaq Griffin, because it kind of signals that, like, Brian Flores, the defense we trotted out last year was so weird and so unique. A blitz zone, a zone blitz defense is kind of, you don't usually when teams, especially at the NFL level, are very blitz heavy. And this is true of Brian Flores' defenses in the past. They've been very man heavy. But the Vikings they've got like, 10 safeties and 2 cornerbacks. So you can't really play like man coverage guys with guys who don't have the hip fluidity or the back pedal technique or everything else that goes into being able to play sticky press man coverage or off man coverage. They didn't really have the tool set. So Flores kind of, I won't say invented, but did something fairly unprecedented at the NFL level to do like a defense designed out of 6-7 man blitzes, but with the spot drop zones behind it. So all that to say, like, the Shaq Griffin signing makes me think they might want to invest a little bit more in guys who can run, who can cover, who can play sticky coverage. So there are some guys like Andrew Phillips who might be available there with like the 100th pick or wherever the Vikings are picking. Guys who kind of like Shaq Griffin have the size and the athleticism, not just in terms of like how fast was their 40 time, but like on tape, are they fluid flipping their hips in zone turns, speed turns? How are they in the back pedal? How, can they anticipate and sink their hips into, staying on top of guys in dig routes or whatever. So guys like that, I feel like we need a few more guys in the cornerback room who have the physical skill set to be able to play man coverage. So all that's to say, like, I feel like we need more cornerbacks, not just because, look at the cornerback room right now and the question marks and the injury concerns that we have there, but also in terms of like, if Brian Flores is going to go back to more man coverage, which is kind of what he was known for, both as a Patriots defensive, play caller, but also in Miami, he's going to need to add more cornerback firepower. So, and we saw they were interested in trading for L'Jarius Sneed. So I do think that's still a position of need on the Vikings roster right now. So those are, throwing out a couple names, but moreover to like kind of types of guys that I think they might be interested in. That's kind of where I'm thinking of how day 3 might start off for the Vikings.
Yeah, they ranked 32nd in completion percentage allowed last year, and that's not ideal. So I'm hoping whatever the fix is, hopefully they know about that stat and say, hey, I swear to God, it's been like 4 straight seasons of Vikings football where completions after completion, and then they finally shored up the run defense a little bit, so it wasn't like I used to get excited like 3 seasons ago when it was 2nd and 5. I'd be like, sweet, they only got 5 yards. And that kind of dialed back a little bit these last 2 or this season with Flores. But yeah, they got to correct the completion percentage. And the only thing that really bugged me about free agency when you talked about defensive tackles was I understand that Christian Wilkins was too expensive, even though Flores drafted and all that. But there were like 5 or 6 defensive tackles that were good, that were available, like Grover Stewart or Leonard Williams. So they had all these options, and, and some decent cap space. And then they're like, hey, Jerry Tillery, baby. And so that's why I'm tending to believe that their 2nd pick will probably be a defensive tackle, because in free agency, they're down to Calais Campbell. That's like the last big name, and he's about as old as me. So I was disappointed that they struck out on defensive tackle, because we know in our heart of hearts we've been searching for one of those sons of bitches for a decade, the one that actually get to the quarterback. Like, we're coming from the days of when Sheldon Richardson was a huge signing for us because we're like, oh my God, they realized that it's important. So I hope maybe next offseason they can look at themselves in the mirror and be like, all right, now we got all this money. We can team build like in the trenches. That's my little speech on defensive tackle.
Yeah, I feel you there. The only thing I would say is like the money that these interior defensive linemen are getting is like insane. Like Christian Wilkins is a good player. I don't think he's a game-changing player, but he got game-changing money. He's like what, the 7th highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL right now. It's Nick Bosa, Chris Jones, Aaron Donald retired now, Tyreek Hill, Brian Burns, TJ Watt, Devontae Adams, Christian Wilkins. Like Wilkins is a good player. Don't get me wrong. The Vikings would be a substantially better team with Wilkins. And also I feel like, you're paying elite money for like a very good player. That's fine. You get to some of these like Leonard Williams, also a good player, but like some of the contracts that were getting doled out to some of these interior defensive linemen who all have question marks, I feel like, I do not blame them for saying like, that's all just like a little too rich. Let's invest in these interesting edge defenders who we feel like we can get some value out of these guys. Let's invest in a rangy coverage linebacker in Blake Cashman. Let's invest in some of these, a bridge quarterback in Sam Darnold who gives us some optionality at the quarterback position. So I kind of understand why they targeted other players. Obviously, when you're only signing Jerry Tillery, that's not going to get and bring back Jonathan Grenard. That's You had the worst defensive tackle, arguably one of the worst defensive tackle rooms in the NFL, and you got, probably a little bit worse. So, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, but at the same time, like sometimes there isn't really a good, like paying Christian Wilkins $30 million a year, like giving him the Justin Jefferson money. That's not a good allocation. Even though they have the cap space, you got to save that money for, a better spending. So, I get it. It's still, I look at the defensive roster, especially interior defensive line, and it's like depressing.
Yeah.
So, you compare to like, the Vikings have so many great interior defensive linemen throughout their entire history. So it's like, it's sad that it's come to Jerry Tillery and Jonathan Bullard and Harrison Phillips. So I really like Bill Phillips and I like Bullard too, but like you could do a lot better with pretty much any other NFL team. So I get it, but also
it was so weird. Two of the guys at the top of the free agent lists were L'Jarius Sneed and Christian Wilkins, and none of them have been to a Pro Bowl. None of them have been all pro. And, that isn't the holy grail of, are you a football badass? But the fact that they're getting mucho dinero and none of them's even been sniffed for a Pro Bowl, it's like, especially Wilkins, it's like, God, that's weird. All right, Josh, what do you got? We got 2 more for Nick. What's your second to last one?
Yeah, moving back to the draft a little bit, we had Thor Nystrom on here on Friday, and he was very adamant about if they do end up trading up for a quarterback that he wants to keep that 2025 first-round pick. If the Vikings do end up trading up, how committed would you be to keeping that 2025 first, considering they don't have that second rounder, and they're basically, if they move it, their first pick in that draft would be in the 3rd round?
Yeah, I've seen some people say like if they get the right quarterback, who cares what the price is, which I feel like that's not the approach. That's not how like the Wall Street GM is going to be. He's not going to be thinking like it doesn't matter what the cost is. Like every asset, you got to balance your ledger on the asset side and the liability side. And you got to see what is the upside. So I do feel like, and you also have to be honest with yourself. Look, right now the Vikings have the worst odds to win the NFC North in 2024 of any of the teams. So you're talking about probably what's more likely than not to be a pretty good draft pick next year. Now, it's possible things can go right. Maybe the odds will shift a lot if they, trade up for McCarthy or Drake May, as that seems to be maybe the most 2 likely options right now. I could see the odds shifting, and I could see a lot of crazy things can happen. Obviously, nothing's written in stone right now. Everything, the NFL surprises us every year. But that said, you should wait. You should be treating the 2025 first round pick, I think, is pretty valuable. Probably more valuable than even like the 11th overall pick right now, arguably, because right now the Vikings are projected to be somewhere in the back end of the top 10 based on NFL futures betting odds and stuff, which aren't perfect, but it's a nice back of the envelope way of, gut checking. Where's this roster right now? What's the outlook of the team next year? And because obviously things can go right in the right way. They can also go right in the wrong way. And the Vikings could wind up with an even higher pick than that, top 5 pick. You don't want to be the Panthers trading away the first overall pick,
right?
And not realizing how much of a premium you ended up paying because you just threw that pick in there because, you got to go get your guy or whatever. So that's a long-winded way of saying if they have, Drake May number 1 on the draft board, sure, like throw that in there. Try and get the Patriots or whoever it is you're trading up with the Commanders maybe to take the 2026 first overall pick, where the Vikings will hopefully by that point be a little bit more competitive. I think 2025 could be or 2024 could be a bit of a a rebuilding year. That when you let Kirk Cousins and Daniil Hunter both walk in free agency, you're not setting yourself to win now necessarily. So you got to value your 2025 first rounder with that in mind. At the same time, if they have Drake May first on their board, that's the kind of guy that 3 first-round picks. It hasn't worked out for a lot of teams in the past to give up that much draft ammo, but like most of the guys that have been injected into these parachuted in these NFL offenses have not been throwing to guys the caliber of Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson with the offensive line that the Vikings have right now, which, shocker, it's still weird to talk about it, but it's a good offensive line, man. It's like yeah. they are really good. So especially when they're healthy, which they aren't always, and they weren't always last year, but like it's a good offensive line. It's a well-coached offensive line. So the offensive architecture is there. If you really believe May to me, he's a very boomer bust prospect. So if you really believe, if you buy into the upside there with Drake May, then it's going to hurt a lot, especially if the Vikings end up with like a top 5 pick next year that we don't get to end up using. Like I said, like the Panthers, that's going to sting. But at the same time, if you really believe in Drake May, then you got to pull that. I'm just obviously, if they could wind up with Jaden Daniels, even Caleb Williams, if you throw out crazy scenarios. But if you just feel like Caleb Williams seems dead set to go to Chicago, and Jaden Daniels seems like, I don't really know, but it seems like most people seem to think he's going to the Commanders. I don't know why, but that seems to be the smoke right now. Who knows? We could all be wrong. They could, the Commanders could take Daniels, and the Vikes could be trading up for, or the Commanders could take May, and the Vikes could be trading up for Daniels. A lot of crazy things could happen. With McCarthy, because I just presume he's not going to be the first of the 3 quarterbacks coming off the board, I don't think you necessarily need to throw in the first round pick at that, because at that point, if you're trading up with the Cardinals, if you're trading up the Chargers at that point, I don't think you need to give up more than 11 and 23 to move up that. Maybe you throw in like an additional third or something, but at that point, I'm not giving up 3 firsts to move up for the 4th quarterback off the board, who at that point I think we would all acknowledge is probably not in an ideal. JJ McCarthy is probably not the first on the Vikings board right now. So that's again, I'm a long-winded way of saying like you do have to take the upside, but also the downside risk into play. It's a premium pick that you're talking about trading away the 2025 first. I wouldn't want to do it, but I would if everybody in the scouting department is they think Drake May is a generational prospect on the caliber of Caleb Williams or even Trevor Lawrence or Andrew Luck or whoever, then yeah, I think that kind of player is worth. I'm not going to miss another Lewis Seen being thrown into the package. Of course, it could also be another top 5 pick or whatever. So you do have to acknowledge that risk. But yeah, I mean that's. If you want to win a Super Bowl, you got to swing for the fences and stop trying to hit, singles. So I get it, and I would be on board with it if it were for me. Yeah, I would throw it in there if it came down to it.
I keep on going back and forth on this just because the same sort of thing you've been saying. That 2025 pick could be very valuable if the Vikings take a step back. But then I also type in over the cap and look at all that cap space that they got next year. They could pretty easily fill a lot of their needs, whatever they are next offseason, with a lot of that cap room too. And obviously some of that's going to go to Jefferson. Some of that's probably going to go to Darisaw at some point too. But yeah, it's a very interesting predicament that Kwesi has to navigate here in the next couple weeks.
No.
Nick, this show is going to be called Nick Olson's Draft Recommendations and Nick Olson's Draft Predictions. So let's get you out of here on that note. Tell me, what would General Manager Olson do? And when we get there, what is your formal prediction in round 1?
It's interesting hearing Kwesi talk so much about like a collaborative approach as GM. Like if it were me, I was surprised when I finally got around to watching JJ McCarthy's film by how much I liked it, because I was kind of I've read what everybody says about him, that he's just kind of like his arm talent is like fine. Oh, he does like a lot of the right things or whatever, but like he's not that good. He doesn't have the upside. He doesn't have the highlight reel, which is true. Like his highlight reel is nothing compared to Jaden Daniels or Drake Mays. but like he just plays good winning football and he makes the right decisions on time very consistently. And there isn't a lot of ugly on his tape, which is I feel like sometimes we get a little bit enamored with the highlight reels, especially in the draft. Like Drake May's highlight reel he has some of the most insane throws. And that's kind of what's fun about him, is because you can see like, what if those highlight reels become like what if he becomes the next Josh Allen or throw out your crazy high, arm talent. He's kind of got everything you want in a modern prototypical foot, between the size, the arm, the creativity, the aggression. He brings so much, especially I think for Vikings fans who are used to Kirk Cousins played, very by the book, and May plays very aggressively and very creatively in a way that, he kind of as a rebound quarterback, he has a lot. He brings a lot to the table that like were Kirk Cousins' flaws or weaknesses in his game. Who's we would be, to be honest, we would be lucky to draft a quarterback as good as Kirk Cousins, because he was a very good quarterback for the Vikings. But at the same time, like May gives you that top 5 elite blue chip upside. At the same time, though, like I think McCarthy's like a really good, like you just watch his tape, and granted, like Michigan was stacked and everything, but like he just plays a very winning brand of football, and like there's not a lot of projection needed to see like how McCarthy is going to translate, just because like he's running a pro style offense. He has full command of it. He does a lot of NFL level things. And granted, Drake May did too, but like just in terms of the precise mechanics of operating an offense, going through your progressions and making the right reads, it's kind of what makes JJ McCarthy boring. And I get why people don't like him, but like, it's like a home run hitter who strikes out a lot versus a guy who just very consistently hits singles or whatever, or sometimes doubles and stuff. And that's McCarthy's tape. Like, yeah, it's a lot of like speed outs and a lot of like quick curls or whatever. And like, but it moved the offense down the field, and they won a lot of games. And I feel like, especially in like a Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay type offense, the kind of thing that Kevin O'Connell runs, McCarthy is just going to be just an easily seamless translation into that offense. So, like, yeah, is he going to be the next Josh Allen? No, but like I also feel like we shouldn't be chasing the ghost of the next Patrick Mahomes, because like every quarterback is unique. You would never want to pass on Joe Burrow because like, oh, he doesn't have the arm talent to be the next the next Justin Herbert, the next Patrick Mahomes. Because like, well, no, but he could be the next Joe Burrow. And the same thing with CJ Stroud. Like there are a lot of knocks on CJ Stroud's game because like, oh, he doesn't have like the arm talent necessarily to be like, but like, yeah, but he could be the next CJ Stroud. And look at what the Texans are building. So all that's to say, like, me personally, giving up 11 and 23 for McCarthy is a little bit more interesting to me than giving up 11-23 and a 2024 and our 2025 first, and also some sweetener on top of that because it needs to be a Godfather offer to like talk the Patriots off the ledge or whatever. So if that's the choice, like me personally, I really like McCarthy's tape, and I feel like people neg him, but like his arm talent is really good. It's not like top 5 in the NFL, but like I feel like he would have an above average NFL arm. You look at some of the seam route touchdown throws he had, some of the intermediate dig throws, far outs he had. Like he's got a really good live NFL arm. So and he's also extremely athletic. Like maybe it's because he's like skinny and white or whatever, but like he's like, but like no, like he's not. He's not like RG3 or anything, but if you want to do like they mixed in some zone read stuff, and he's really fast on an open field. I mean, he's like he's outrunning future NFL starting edge defenders in some of these games. So it's interesting talking about like ceilings or whatever. If you just looked at his athletic tape and his measurables and his arm, like there's an example that you could make the argument. I'm not making it, but like you could make the argument that McCarthy has more upside in terms of his athleticism than Jaden Daniels, just because of like Jaden Daniels is obviously a very special athlete, but McCarthy's a very fast athlete as well, and I feel like he has a little bit more arm talent to him as well, and I feel like he's a better processor and in times of like keeps his eyes up when he's under pressure. So that's I'm kind of dipping into also like my thoughts on these guys as prospects. So if you're asking like Nick only trusting his gut on what he would do, understanding that, I've watched like 4 games of these guys, I don't have like strong takes. I like what I've seen from JJ McCarthy, and I don't like overpaying and worrying if I'm going to be the next, did I just give up 3 firsts for Trey Lance or whatever, or, pick your trade up bust, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, like, this is all with the acknowledgement that, like, yeah, you might have guys that you personally like, but like, I'm a big believer in the wisdom of the crowds. And I'm a big believer that, like, you got to collaborate with everybody else. And there's a lot of really exciting stuff about Drake May. And if the staff feels like, if Josh McCown feels like, hey, I already coached this guy, I can be his QB coach again in the NFL, and I can really bring out that, Justin Herbert level style of play, but level of play out of this Drake May kid, then yeah, sure, let's give up the 3 first-round picks if you think we're getting Justin Herbert on a rookie contract. Like, yeah, absolutely. So, long-winded way of saying, like, me personally, I really like McCarthy's tape. At the same time, when I see everybody else ranking JJ McCarthy like as a late first-round pick and Drake May as like 1B in this draft class, like, I don't necessarily agree with that, but also I don't have the hubris to say like they're wrong, I'm right. So all that to say, like, I'm kind of hoping they do the trade up for May, but I wouldn't be too mad if we wanted with JJ McCarthy, because I also feel like this team could be really, really good, man, with JJ McCarthy. He's a good quarterback prospect, and there's a lot that he does that I think will be instantly translate to very efficient, good football for the Vikings next year. So I'm kind of happy either way with those two guys.
Is your recommendation different than a prediction?
It's so hard to like predict what will happen because there's a lot of variables. I think you kind of just have to go in order. Like, Bears are taking Caleb Williams, which I think is the right choice for them. Commanders, if I were them, I would probably want May, but it seems like they're pretty locked in on Daniels, and I get that. Like, Daniels is also a really exciting prospect. People compare him a lot to Lamar, and he's not Lamar Jackson, but he brings that same level of just insane 12 on 11 type, 12 on 11 type offense. Like, the defense is going to be outnumbered because you got to have a spy on him at all times, but he can also beat you with his arm too. So he's not like Lamar. I think is underrated as a processor and has more arm talent than people give him credit for. So, and Daniels has some problems, I think, with post snap processing. Not that he can go through his progressions, but I feel like there are some limitations there that I don't want to compare him to an MVP, but all that's to say, I can see why, with who is it, the former Cardinals coach who's now OC there. Kingsbury. Now that Kingsbury's there, I can see like that's the kind of, and they went out and they signed Mariota, so it kind of makes sense for what they're building there. But if I were them, I think May's a better prospect, but also I get what they're doing and why they would do it. So all that's to say, like, if that happens the way it seems to be happening, I think the Vikings will probably offer, 3 first-round picks and maybe a little bit more to move up to 3. And then it's just a question of, like, will the Patriots move off their block? And if I'm the Patriots, I'm taking that deal, because you look at the Patriots roster right now, and I can't see I don't care who you have at quarterback, I can't see them succeeding throwing to KJ Osborne as your number 1 wide receiver or whatever. So they've got a ways to go, and then that their offensive line is arguably even in worse shape than their wide receiver room. So they just have a lot of work to do to build a good offensive architecture. And I feel like having 3 first-round picks, one of which might be a very high one next year, you could get your blindside protector and a very good there's a very good wide receiver class, a very good offensive tackle class. So you could build the building blocks for a future, if it's Shitter, Sanders, or whoever it is that they wind up plugging in, or they could, you take one of those, the Bo Nix on day 2 or whatever. I feel like that would be interesting. And I feel like you would start putting in the building blocks. However, not everybody subscribes to, oh, well, you need the building blocks because, like elite quarterback prospects there have been some, like, Peyton Manning, his first rookie season did not go so well. His career turned out to be pretty darn good. So, the Patriots might just, if they really believe in Drake May, there's not going to be any amount of draft picks that could talk them off the list, into trading. So if that's the case, I feel like the Vikings will at that point trade up for JJ McCarthy. I just feel like he's such a good fit for the offense. And I feel like the Cardinals, who is at Monty Ossenfort, has shown the proclivity to love trading down. So I feel like as much as the Marvin Harrison Jr. steam to Arizona, and I think that does make sense. They desperately need a wide receiver for Kyler to throw to. But they could also move back up. I mean, Monty's one of those guys who I can see bouncing all around the board. And then the Chargers, I feel like they're in a position where they don't have any wide receivers, but they also need another tackle for Justin Herbert. So I could see them moving down as well. I feel like 4 or 5, one of those places, that would be where the Vikings would move up. And I do feel like the other possibility is one of these other teams like dark horses, Giants move up, Las Vegas moves up, the Broncos move up. But I feel like with the Vikings having 2 2024 first-round picks, that gives them just more ammo to outbid anyone else. So especially because like the NFL overvalues current year picks more than future year picks, probably because like if you're the GM, who knows if you're going to still be employed by the time you get that future purchase. So, but yeah, I feel like that puts the Vikings in a good position to have the highest offer on the table for the number 4 pick, the number 5 pick. If I were to put like percentages on it, I'd say like right now it's pretty 50-50 between if it's going to be traded up to 3 for May or traded up for 4 or 5 for McCarthy. Okay. I feel like they're going to try and get May done though. Like I don't know anybody in the building. I have no connection. So this is me just like completely speculating. I don't know. This is not sourced. This is certainly on triple source, but like my reading of the tea leaves is that they really like Drake May, and they're going to, if there's any possible way for them to move up to 3, if he's on the board there, they're going to do it. I think McCarthy, I don't want to call him the backup option because they're still, I think they probably really love McCarthy because of what he can do in this offense. But I feel like if they're able to convince Elliott Wolf to take the Godfather offer, they're gonna do their best to give him the God, because I do think there's just too much smoke. Like having Josh McCown as hiring him as your quarterback's coach when he coached Drake May as a high schooler, that's just like a crazy coincidence. And he fits the mold of so much of like what the NFL wants. They're the new meta of like, what does the ideal quarterback look like? Well, he's aggressive and he's creative and he has a lead arm talent to go toe to toe with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. So he just kind of fits. If you're swinging for the fences and you're saying like Kirk Cousins was good, but I want to be elite. I want to go to that level above it. You can kind of understand why they'd be putting together the crazy offer for the elite, the next Justin Herbert type prospect. So. I would get it. And I would say if I had to pick one more likely than the other, I would say the trade up to 3 for May is more likely. But again, I don't have any inside sources. So
no, that's all right.
It'll be fun. We'll probably have to wait until draft night for it to happen.
Yeah.
I've seen some people speculating like when is the trade up going to be announced? I feel like the Vikings probably and the Patriots probably want to confirm that May will be on the board and that that the Commanders will be taking Daniels, because there's no reason to like announce the trade up to number 3 now, or for the Vikings to trade up to number 4 or number 5 right now when there's still it's unlikely, but crazy things could happen on draft night. And I feel like and it's not like you need to necessarily like the Vikings, if they trade up, it doesn't matter if it happens on draft night because like their draft night's kind of over once they trade up and they've turned in the card for Drake May or they turn in the card for McCarthy. So Vikings have no incentive to necessarily announce this trade now. They might have a handshake deal in place with the Cardinals or whoever, but there's no need to announce it now. There's still a lot of variables on the table. So I do think we'll probably be waiting to draft night to find out who will be the QB of the future for the Vikings moving forward. And I do think, gun to my head, it will be Drake May. But a lot of crazy things. It could be Michael Penix. We just don't know. So that's kind of what's going to make draft night fun. So
yeah, I hear you. And the good news is, the folks watching this, it'll probably be Tuesday. Only 16 days to go before we get this grand crescendo of the offseason and competitive rebuild. All right, Josh, you and I talk to Paul Allen tomorrow. Don't miss that. Do you have any closing arguments, Josh?
No, that's about it. Thanks for joining us, Nick. This was a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
Yeah, Nick, I'm going to hit you up sooner than 2 years, so that way we can talk again, and hopefully be talking about Mayor McCarthy in probably a month and a half. All right, man?
I love it. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, you guys take care. Have a wonderful evening. Later.